Is a cruise ship cabin on deck 2 a really bad idea? Today I want to talk about whether this is a great idea or truly terrible up next. Hey everyone, it's Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com. Royal Caribbean cruise ships of all sizes have cabins on the lowest deck passengers can access, which is usually deck 2, although on Royal Caribbean's biggest ships, it's actually deck 3. Regardless, should you book a cabin on the lowest deck possible? I wanted to give you the pros and cons of booking a cabin on the lowest possible deck in this week's episode. Starting with, of course, when you book a cabin, Royal Caribbean allows you to select the exact cabin that you want. This includes rooms on deck 2 on most ships. While there is a deck 1, there are no cabins down there. So the lowest deck you can stay on is deck 2, except for Oasis or Quantum class ships, in which is deck 3. There are two types of staterooms on the lowest passenger decks: inside and ocean view cabins. Inside cabins have no windows or views outside of your room. It's just four walls, a door, and of course your private bathroom. Ocean view cabins have either a porthole or a large window that looks out to the ocean. The window doesn't open or move, but it does provide natural light and a peek outside. Even at deck 2, ocean view cabins are above the waterline, so you'll never book a Royal Caribbean cabin that's below the waterline by any means. One variation you may find of cabins on these decks are larger ocean view rooms, which Royal Caribbean calls spacious ocean view rooms. Another type of cabin are cabins designed for solo cruisers, such as Studio Ocean View on deck 3 on Harmony of the Seas. You won't find any balcony cabins or suites on the lowest passenger deck. So, is deck 2 on a cruise ship a bad idea? Should you avoid booking a cabin on deck 2 or 3? Or are these hidden gems? By far, the best reason to book a stateroom on the lowest deck is it's probably going to save you money. Inside and ocean view rooms are typically the cheapest cabins, and since most people would pick a cabin on a higher deck by default, prices tend to be a little less on the lowest deck. Another advantage of staying on a low deck is the lack of movement you may perceive. The common piece of advice regarding avoiding seasickness is booking a cabin on a low deck mid-ship. Since deck 2 or 3 is the lowest deck you can book, those sensitive to motion sickness may find these low decks beneficial. You may also feel like a genius by having a cabin on deck 2 when you return to the ship after a short excursion. There's almost always a way for the elevators to get back upstairs when you're getting back on the ship after a tour, but those staying on the lowest decks can simply take a short walk back to their room. After a long day on land, it's nice to get back to your room and in the shower a lot sooner than later. Now, if all this sounds great, well, there are also some reasons to avoid cabins on deck 2. As mentioned, there's only inside and ocean view cabins on the lowest deck. If those types of rooms aren't your favorite, then these won't work for you. By being on a low deck, you're also relying on an elevator far more than people on a higher deck. Royal Caribbean ships that have 14, 16, or even 18 decks mean you're either taking long walks up and down the stairs or waiting more for an elevator. Someone on a higher deck could more easily commute, if you will, between their rooms and popular public decks. Sometimes, noise can be an issue since your cabin might be near the crew areas where work is done throughout the day and night. Light sleepers may find this especially problematic. One thing to look at is what is one deck above and below your cabin to ensure there aren't public venues nearby. That's another reason to avoid any room on any ship that's either one deck or above or below a public venue. So, should you book a cabin on the lowest deck of a cruise ship? Ultimately, it isn't necessarily a problem, but you got to be okay with the disadvantages. The primary reason someone would want to book a cabin on deck 2 or 3 is because of the price. I think more often than not, that's the number one reason anyone would book a cabin on these decks, because they tend to be the most inexpensive cabins you can book, and it's hard to overlook the price. Even with the additional reliance on elevators, the savings can usually outweigh the commute times required to get around the ship. But if you're the type of person that spends a lot of time in their room, then a low deck may not matter. I really like the convenience of being on a low deck to get to the main dining room, casino, and of course, getting back on the cruise ship at the end of the day. While most guests may end up booking a cabin on a higher deck, the cost savings alone may make it a smart choice. So if a cabin on deck 2 or 3 isn't in the cards for you, where should you book? Or where are some cabins people tend to book all the time? Definitely number one would be midship cabins. And a big reason why people like these cabins is if you're particularly prone to seasickness. The allure of a midship cabin is its stability. You won't feel as much the rocking of the sea in a midship cabin as you would when that's all the way forward or all the way back. Another good cabin is something that's surrounded by other cabins. I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but if you're a light sleeper, the best chance for get a good night's sleep is not being in a cabin that's going to be bothered by other noise from surrounding areas. This means a cabin that has a cabin directly above it and a cabin directly below it, as well as cabins on both sides. To find such a cabin is actually harder than you might think. On a typical ship, the top deck of cabins is directly below the pool deck and activity decks, which can be noisy during the day and even into the night, because a lot of times they're doing work. The cabin deck just below the top deck of cabins can be a good choice, but go a couple more decks down, and you're right on top of one of the interior entertainment decks. It's home to lounges, theaters, and other noisy venues. So, if your goal is to have the quietest possible cabin out there, avoid cabins that are not exactly one deck above or below a public venue. You can consult the deck plans of any particular ship to figure out which ones there are here. And then, of course, there are suites. And listen, they're not going to be cheap. Suites are expensive. Some of them really go for crazy prices, but a lot of people that go on cruises will go for a suite because of the amenities they provide. Not only are these cabins larger, they can be in really optimal positions and give you some amazing amenities that are included with your fare. Granted, you are paying more for them, but being able to get more for your money, or at least splurging and getting these things, can be a real advantage. For a lot of people, suites are a very highly sought after type of cabin. In fact, when Royal Caribbean puts out new itineraries out for sale, most often than not, the suites will be the first type of cabin category to go because there are the least amount of cabins on a cruise ship that are dedicated to suites. In addition to that, I think a lot of people just like to splurge and think big, and so they tend to gravitate towards suites first rather than inside rooms, which tend to be like the last category to go on any particular cruise. I think if you're trying to weigh the advantages and disadvantages of booking a cabin on deck 2 versus any other place on the ship, you're probably arguing between deck 2, which is going to be an inside cabin of some kind, versus a balcony. And certainly having a balcony has its pros and cons as well. Of course, having a balcony means you're going to get fresh air. Being able to open that balcony door and get that ocean air in is a really nice benefit. You're going to have privacy, of course, because listen, at the end of the day, it's nice to be able to go to your own private area, have an outside spot with a chair guaranteed every single time, and not have to worry about anybody else taking the seats, unless, of course, somebody in your family does so. But having that nice little secluded area on your balcony can be really, really nice. Of course, a balcony will cost you more, but I think when you're talking about the advantages and disadvantages of which cabin to book, more often people tend to compare a balcony to an inside room and which they'd rather do rather than maybe a suite. So if you're trying to decide if deck 2 or deck 3 is the right choice for you, I think it's really going to come down to your budget and what's more important to you, price or location or what's inside your cabin. After all, you can spend a lot of time doing other things outside the cabin, or if you're going to spend a lot of time in your cabin, then maybe it is worth spending extra for a nicer room. Let me know in the comments below, would you book a cabin on deck 2 or the lowest deck of your cruise ship, whichever one you happen to be on? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And while you're down below our video, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. That way, YouTube lets me have a brand new video to share. This has been Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and we'll talk again real soon.